Viewers, before we go any further, drop your location and the exact time where you are right now. I love seeing how stories like this travel across time zones. Now picture this, because it's how one man's nightmare began. At 6:30 in the morning, just as the crickets were fading out and the first streak of dawn turned the pastures pale gold, the roar of diesel engines shattered the silence. He rolled out of bed in his boxers and an old t-shirt, hair sticking out like he'd fought a tornado in his sleep, and when he rushed to the window, he saw a bulldozer chewing through the oak fence his grandfather had built by hand in 1875. That fence wasn't just wood and nails, it was history, the kind of boundary line maintained for 5 generations, storm after storm, like a stubborn reminder that family pride doesn't rot as easily as timber. And yet here it was, splintering into history dust while some guy sat in a climate-controlled cab sipping coffee, like he was erasing chalk marks from a blackboard instead of wiping out a century and a half of labor. He ran barefoot across gravel that sliced into his feet, yelling like a madman, and the bulldozer driver just pointed lazily toward a white pickup where Jillian Harper, in her black business suit and shark smile, stood holding a clipboard like a priest with Holy Scripture. She called it a legally approved easement and even had the gall to tell him he should be grateful for the increased property value. That's like thanking the thief who just stole your wallet because they lightened your pockets for the walk home. Historians still argue whether Texans are more stubborn about cattle, barbecue, or property lines, but this guy was proof it's the fence that wins. He started rebuilding right there, slamming together barbed wire and wood scraps with shaking hands, scrawling, "No trespassing," on crooked boards like he was trying to hold back an ocean with sandbags. When the cops showed, they sided with the papers Jillian waved like golden tickets, demanding proof he even owned the land his family had sweated on since before Texas became a state. Imagine being told you need ID to prove your own skin is yours. That's how it felt. That night, a delivery truck brought a lawsuit instead of mail, demanding 25 grand for blocking a public easement. The absurdity hit like a cow wandering into a swimming pool, funny in theory, but heartbreaking in reality. He stood there with the weight of legal papers in his hands, realizing this wasn't just about splintered oak. It was about a machine bigger than him, a machine that had decided to turn his ranch into its latest chew toy, and he had to decide whether to be swallowed whole or choke the gears with whatever scraps of defiance he could muster. The days that followed felt like a fever dream. Except instead of sweating under blankets, he was sweating under the weight of violation notices that Jillian delivered like clockwork. $500 a day for every board of what he dared to plant across their shiny new asphalt. He pulled the fence back down after 3 days, not because he gave in, but because survival sometimes looks like stepping back while keeping your fists ready. Cameras went up instead, silent witnesses watching neighbors drive over his family land, as if it were just another shortcut to the grocery store. Some waved with awkward smiles. Others averted their eyes. Nobody wanted to catch the curse of being seen on the wrong side of Jillian Harper's crusade. It was psychological warfare with a polite smile, the kind you usually read about in history books under chapters called land reforms and eminent domain abuse. Finding a lawyer was like trying to lasso fog until he met William Davis, a 50-year-old property attorney who smelled faintly of stale coffee and carried battle scars from his own HOA wars. William's office looked like a tornado of legal pads, coffee rings, and law books that no one had dusted since the Clinton years. But his eyes burned with something that said he wasn't just taking a client, he was joining a fight. He flipped through Jillian's easement document like a detective at a crime scene, stopping when he saw a notary seal supposedly stamped in 1985. "Problem," he muttered. "Your grandfather was already dead 2 years by then." That silence afterward felt heavier than a lead blanket in a dentist chair. Historians still argue whether bureaucracy kills faster than bullets, but in that moment, William proved paperwork can also resurrect the dead, at least on fraudulent easements. The attic search came next, dust thick enough to choke, boxes of yellowed tax receipts, brittle photographs, and one shoe box tucked beneath recipes. Inside lay his grandfather's original will, handwritten, with a clause that made his pulse stutter. The land could never be subject to easements without unanimous consent of living heirs, renewed every 10 years. Not only had Jillian's document been impossible, but the will itself had never been probated, meaning it still stood tall in the eyes of the law. Hope flickered, fragile but alive, like finding dry tinder after a storm. But it wasn't just his fight. Meeting Elena Rodriguez, 72, sipping weak coffee in her chipped mug, shifted the ground beneath his boots. She spoke broken English, tears mixing with shame, telling how she signed a paper thinking it meant playgrounds for children, only to watch bulldozers flatten her garden. Tomatoes, peppers, corn, gone in an afternoon. When she tried to replant elsewhere, they fined her for non-compliant vegetation. If hell has a paperwork department, this is probably how it operates. And as William pulled county records, the pattern screamed louder. Dead owners signing years after death, elderly families cornered, legalese used like a whip. They weren't just stealing land. They were hunting the vulnerable. He looked at Elena's lined face, her trembling hands, and thought, if I quit now, I'm complicit. If I stand, maybe I give her back a garden, maybe I give us all a future. The courtroom smelled faintly of old wood polish and fear, and when Jillian walked in with Sterling and Associates, Dallas lawyers polished like chrome hubcaps, it felt less like a hearing and more like gladiators entering the arena. They painted him as a selfish extremist blocking ambulances, complete with color-coded charts, fake studies, even actors posing as concerned citizens. Judge Williams leaned forward, her tone dripping with condescension, telling him the greater good sometimes demands personal sacrifice. For a second, he thought the gavel had already fallen. Historians still argue whether justice bends toward truth or toward whoever's got deeper pockets, and right then, it looked like the latter. But William, steady as a ranch windmill, rolled out real county records like a magician pulling rabbits, maps proving 2 other faster routes existed, testimony from the fire chief and ambulance director dismantling every safety claim piece by piece. The air shifted. You could feel it. And then came the knockout. Jillian on the witness stand, swearing she gained no personal benefit, just a selfless servant of the community. William laid down bank records showing $280,000 in consulting fees from Lanier Development, plus ownership stakes in the land they were so desperate to carve up. Her face cracked like ice under spring thaw, panic visible as the courtroom buzzed. Federal agents swept in before the hearing even ended, armed with warrants, dragging the story from local corruption into organized crime headlines. Jillian pleaded guilty, for years in federal prison, $600,000 in restitution. Commissioner Morrison followed with 2 years and a lifetime ban from office. His wife's cushy contracts vaporized overnight. The HOA dissolved, fraudulent easements voided. Elena got her garden back, and crews were ordered to rip out the illegal road, replanting oak saplings where the fence once stood. Watching men in neon vests carefully rebuild the same boundaries his grandfather had planted a century and a half earlier felt like time correcting itself. Still, victory came with scars. He started a legal defense fund for rural families, promising no one would face bulldozers and fraudulent signatures alone again. The sweetest twist? Using Jillian's forced restitution, he bought her foreclosed luxury home at auction, then donated it for veterans' housing. That, he thought, is what land should serve. Families, not greed. 6 months later, sunset painted the fields in amber while he stood by the new oak posts, hearing his grandfather's voice in the wind. You did good, boy. Elena invited him to her harvest party, 3 generations laughing over fresh vegetables, proving resilience grows where corruption fails. And as children chased each other between tomato vines, he realized this battle had never been just about dirt, fences, or even family legacy. It had been about proving that ordinary people, when they stand together, can beat systems designed to crush them. The wind down came naturally. Life on the ranch returned to rhythm, the sound of cattle lowing, cicadas tuning their instruments for the night, the fence line strong again. He breathed slower now, longer, the way you do when weight lifts after years pressing down. Maybe scars don't vanish, but they soften, turning into reminders instead of shackles. He thought of Elena's laughter, of neighbors who'd once looked away now waving again, of the small circle of trust restored in a town nearly lost to greed. Justice isn't perfect, it limps, it stumbles, sometimes it hides under piles of paper, but when it shows up, when truth finally lands, it feels like rain after drought. He whispered a thank you to the oak posts, to the soil that held his family's name, and to the voices of ancestors echoing through evening air. Tomorrow would bring chores, storms, sunshine, maybe more battles. But tonight the ranch rested, and so did he.